This is the February 2nd, 2021 meeting of the City of Charleston Board of Zoning Appeals Zoning. Present are Mr. Morrison, Mr. Judon, Ms. Grass, Ms. Richards, Ms. Vargas, Mr. Bennett, and Mr. Robinson. Present from the planning staff are Ms. Stepp, Ms. Ashby, and Mr. Batchelder. These proceedings are being recorded, and we ask that those who speak identify themselves for the board. We'll conduct this meeting in usual fashion. We'll first receive information from city staff about the application and their recommendation. If the recommendation is favorable and no one objects to the application, usually the Board of Zoning Appeals treats the matter as being uncontested and passes it as a matter of course. If, however, the city recommends against the application or there is opposition to the application, we treat the application as contested and hear from the applicant and anyone else who is in favor of the application. Next, we hear from anyone opposed, followed by a short rebuttal from the applicant. We then close the public hearing portion of the meeting for that particular application and open discussion to the Board of Zoning Appeals members only. We'll then make a decision to approve with conditions, or deny the application. The Board of Zoning Appeals Zoning has the authority to do three things. First, to hear appeals to decisions of the zoning administrator. Second, to grant special exceptions, which is a fact-finding function of the board. And third, to grant variances to the zoning ordinance if the application meets the hardship test outlined in section 54.924 of the ordinance. The board may deliberate and make a final decision on a matter by a majority vote of members present at the hearing and qualified to vote, provided that not less than a quorum is present and qualified to vote. However, an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the board members present and voting shall be required before a use variance may be granted. For a variance to be granted, the Board of Zoning Appeals must make the following findings. A, that there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. B, these conditions do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity. C, because of these conditions, the application of the ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. And D, the authorization of a variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property or to the public good, and the character of the district will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. We have one item on the agenda, number A1, that is deferred, and that is 32 Council Street. That will not be heard tonight. The next item on the agenda is an appeal to the zoning administrator's decision to allow a subdivision to create 4 lots that do not meet the minimum 105-foot lot frontage requirement on a public right-of-way, zoned SR1. Mr. Batchelder.
This is a appeal concerning the subdivision of a residential lot in Avondale, and the subdivision of a residential lot within an existing neighborhood has to meet certain requirements beyond the normal requirements that would apply to a new residential subdivision. So in this case, this map shows the location of the property in question. You can see it is on Arcadian Way right here that curves around off of St. Andrews Boulevard. And here's an aerial view of the property. So this is the property in question right here. St. Andrews Boulevard is shown right here. Arcadian comes off St. Andrews across the frontage of this property, turns, and then parallels the Ashley River. You can see other lots with other homes on them in that area. And you can see right here, a little street that has been recently constructed when this photograph was taken. This photograph is about 2, maybe 3 years old. But this was a new street that was created to allow this property along the Ashley River to be subdivided into 4 lots. And this new street is called Reveille Court. So the applicant has filed the application appealing my decision. This is the paperwork. This is the zoning map that just shows that the existing zoning on this property is SR1, single family residential. Same zoning as the other streets or other lots on Arcadian Way in this area and the lots along Reveille Court. And also note that the lot right here at 815 Colony Drive is also zoned SR1. The properties that don't have any color on them, those are not in the city, within the city of Charleston. Those are under the jurisdiction of Charleston County. So in order to create a lot, zoning requirements have to be met. And in this case, the issue that is being appealed is the lot frontage requirement. Lot frontage is defined in the zoning ordinance as the front side of the lot that abuts a street or thoroughfare from which direct vehicular access to lots may be available. Then the frontage requirement is based on subsection C in section 854-824 of the zoning ordinance. And I'm not going to read this right now. I'm going to simply point out that it refers to table 8.2.3. And then I'll come back to the wording of this section after the next slide. So this is table 8.2.3. And it states that the minimum lot frontage requirements for a single family or 2-family residential lot in the SR1 zoning district are 50 feet, except 30 feet on an arc or cul-de-sac. So that's the minimum requirement for creating new lots in new neighborhoods. But if we go back to subsection C and read the language that is in the larger font, states that that 50-foot rule applies except the residential lots within existing residential subdivisions may not be subdivided with lot frontages less than the average lot frontage of all abutting residential lots across the street or streets, and residential lots within 5 lots on either side of the frontage of the subject lot, or the minimum lot frontage for the zoning district, in this case 50 feet, whichever is greater. When you take the average frontage of the surrounding lots, you end up with a minimum frontage requirement that is quite a bit larger than 50 feet. So the average frontage for the surrounding lots was calculated initially with the lot frontages shown in the red circles on this map. So 692 Arcadian Way, the subject property, 701 Arcadian is directly across the street. That had a 75-foot frontage using the frontage on this side of the property. Then 92 feet for the first lot on Reveille Court. Second one has 91. third 91, and the fourth and final lot 97 feet. Those lots are directly across Reveille Court from the subject property. Then 815 Colony Drive, which is adjacent to 692 Arcadian Way. It has touches right here, this very short length of the property line abuts 692 Arcadian Way. So that is counted, and that has a frontage of not 106 feet. Now, I think you could make a case that you should include these other additional lots further down Arcadian Way and the Oakdale Place lots, number 3, which has a frontage of 173 feet, and this lot right here, which has an 80-foot frontage. But because those are within 5 lots of the subject property on the same side of the street. So if you just count the red ones, the frontages that are circled in red, the number comes out to be 92 feet. If you count those additional lots, it's 94 feet. Now, this was my initial response to the applicant when he requested my written decision on how I determined the average lot frontage requirement for the subdivision of 692. And this was made right before Christmas. And then I realized, and let me just back up for a second. Now, the question of the average frontage requirement and how it applies to this particular area of the city has already been before the Board on Appeals twice before, back in 2014, March of 2014, and January of 2015. And that occurred when this property right here on Reveille Court was subdivided. What is now the 4 lots on Reveille Court was subdivided to allow the creation of this street and the 4 lots that abut the Ashley River. So that was an issue in 2014 and 2015, and I had already, and I could not find the records from the Board of Zoning Appeals hearings that we had back then. And then I realized some of that information was available on my computer, and I was able to find it. And that then changed my decision from what's shown here, where I used a 75-foot frontage for 701 Arcadian Way. That changed to using a 150-foot frontage for this lot instead. The other lot frontages remained the same. And I never counted the lots, 811 Colony Drive, the properties on St. Andrews, because in my opinion, they don't meet the requirement of what should be included in this average lot frontage calculation, because they're not single or 2 family lots. And in one case over here, they're not even residentially zoned properties. So, so using the frontages that are circled in red on this map, that changed the average frontage to 105 feet, which then becomes the minimum frontage requirement for a subdivision of 692 Arcadian Way. And if you include these additional lots, that average drops from 105 feet down to 100 feet. So those are the decisions that I made just recently that are being appealed tonight. And I think one of the issues is whether this Colony Drive property should be included. 50 Colony Drive should be included in the calculation. And then what the actual frontages of lots should be. There's 4 lots in Beverly Court. But again, going back in time, this was the original decision I made for the subdivision of this large property. And the owner of this property at that time appealed my decision. And so there was a hearing in front of the board, and the board upheld my decision that as to what the average frontage requirement was based on the frontages of the lots that are identified here with the red circle. That was a March 2014 appeal. Then the neighbors on Arcadian Way disagreed with my decision. And so they appealed the matter back to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And this reflects the frontage calculations that I used at that time. That was January of 2015. You note that on 701 Arcadian Way, I went from 72 feet here. And we get this information from different sources, so it might change a little bit to 150 feet here. And I recalled, and this is when I realized I had made a mistake on the initial letter I had sent in right before Christmas, this past Christmas, that I had made a mistake because I had not used the proper frontage for this property. And I recalled from back in 2014, the period of time leading up to the January 2015 appeal, that I had had conversations with the owners of this property, and they had convinced me that yes, I should use this side, this long side of this property as the frontage of the property rather than the short side, because that is where their front door was, the front door that they used. And the driveway comes off of this side of the lot, and so they really felt that this was the front side of their property. So that I changed from the 72 over here to 150 feet. But in the meantime, I had realized that the property that is now being subdivided, 692 Arcadian Way, that property was actually 3 lots of record. And so you now see the frontages that I used at that time. It was originally 3 lots, and the property lines were never abandoned. And so the plat of record for the property showed those 3 lots, and that's what I used. So after this, these frontages were used to calculate the average. The minimum frontage requirement for the subdivision of this property became 91 feet, and that is what has resulted in the creation of the 4 lots on Arcadian or on Reveley Court that are there today. But you'll also note that I included the Colony Drive properties in those calculations on both occasions. The January 2015 hearing and the March of 2014 hearing. So there was a lot of history to how I was used, which lots were being used to calculate this average frontage from years ago. And I try to be consistent and with what I had done before in calculating the requirements for 692 Arcadian Way. And as I said, that ended up with a 105-foot average lot frontage requirement for any new lots that would be created. So that summarizes my position on it. And one other thing that I'll point out is that this frontage up here on 3 Oakdale Place, and just in case this comes up in discussion, but this frontage of 160 feet, this again is the map that I was using years ago to determine the average frontage for the subdivision that eventually became Reveley Court. But that number changed to 173 feet on the newer calculations. And that's because we've subsequently found that we had missed this short little section of the lot frontage that is identified with a separate dimension in addition to what is shown here, which is 160 feet. So we corrected that when we realized we had made that mistake, and that's why we're now using the 173 feet for the frontage requirement. That concludes my presentation about how I came up with my calculation of the average frontage requirement for the surrounding lots, the lots that surround 692 Arcadian Way, based on the requirements of section 54-824. And now I think we will go ahead and promote the applicant. Is that correct, Penny? And
Yes.
I'm looking for, am I looking for Mr. Barr?
Yes.
And I see phone numbers, and but I don't see his name. Can you tell me?
Okay, just 1 second. He did sign up through boards to speak.
I'm going to promote Mr. Lessman.
Yes.
Help us determine that.
I have, do you see the number 843-377-1226? I have 2 numbers for Mr. Barr.
I don't see that number.
How about 577?
Memo, Lee,
Pardon?
that 377 numbers at the top of his memo, I think that that you have on the screen.
I don't see that number.
Yeah, it's right at the top after Capers G. Bott III, Mr. Batchelder.
Right, I see that, but I don't see that number here. So what's the other number you said you had?
The other number may be 843-577-5083.
No, I don't see that either. So I'm going to promote promoting Mr. Lessman to be a panelist. And I can try these numbers and see.
Lee, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can hear you.
Wait a minute. Okay, I just started my video. Do you see me?
Which phone number are you?
Well, it could be on my letterhead, 377-1226 or 577-5083
Well,
or 693-4379.
well, it doesn't matter because you're in and you're
Oh,
in
okay.
the list. So I guess, I don't know what it was, but something worked.
But,
Okay.
but you're named as Ellis Leeseman on my screen, Capers.
Okay, well, Ellis is co-counsel. He's got we're representing the same client, but he has a follow-up issue on the same property. Well, is the floor mine then?
Yes, and I guess I should swear you in
Okay,
if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's mighty nice seeing you again. Generally, meetings of the BZA do not lend themselves to the expedient resolution of complicated matters. And now that we're doing it by Zoom, I would suggest that that's multiplied several times, because this is a fairly complicated question. I'll try to make it simple. And I begin with, if you'll permit me to do so, since I'm a lawyer, just stating a principle of law, which is that statutes and ordinances that are in derogation of the natural rights of persons to use land are to be strictly construed in favor of the free use of land. Lee, do you have, oh, there it is. If everybody is looking at my memorandum on that, I don't know that you can read the italicized language, but the city ordinance that Lee put up earlier provides that the following lot frontage requirements in the table 8.2.3 shall apply to all new single and two-family residential lots. That doesn't apply because it says except that residential lots within existing residential subdivisions may not be subdivided with lot frontages less than the average lot front footage of all abutting residential lots across the streets, and residential lots within 5 lots on either side of the frontage of the subject lot, or the minimum on the table, whichever is greater. Now, that ordinance that Lee had published earlier and that I just read, according to the footnotes at the end of the ordinance, was adopted sometime after 1997. The footnotes at the bottom of the ordinance begin with the year 1997, and then they describe amendments leading up to 2020. But we know that the ordinance could not have been adopted before 1997. Now, the dilemma that creates is this. We are dealing with the subdivision of Avondale. Avondale was first subdivided in 1941. And over the years, the subdivision of Avondale has been expanded upon and sliced and diced so that applying this 1997 or after ordinance to a subdivision which originated in 1941 presents no simple task. Lee, could we scroll? I guess you could scroll to my exhibits, maybe.
Sure.
The platted ones. the plats themselves, and let's get to the first plat. Okay, now in front of you, what you see here, oh, and by the way, let me say that the description of this item on the agenda is misdescribed. It states that this is an appeal of the approval of this subdivision. And it's actually an appeal of the disapproval of the subdivision. Lee, am I saying that correctly?
You are, you're saying
Yeah.
that.
So for the record, I'm not appealing Mr. Batchelder's approval. I'm appealing his disapproval. And I know it might be hard for those of you who see this small screen as small as I see it to read that fine print. And I have a magnifying glass and an enlarged plat in front of me. Now, what you see in front of you are 4 lots that are subdivided out of lots that I'll show you in a minute. But I wanted to narrate for you what the frontages are. Lee, I don't think my cursor can be seen on this. There you go. Let's start with that one. Now that front footage where Lee's cursor is 75 feet even. And then go to the east along that line, it's 114 feet. And then when you bend around Reveille Court, that is 81 point, I can't even read it myself, 81.67 feet. The next lot is 77.96 feet. And then the final lot is 75 feet. So that what we're seeking to create here are 4 lots of the dimensions that I have just published for you, the average of which is 77.4 feet. So, and what I'm going to show you is that the predominant pattern in Avondale subdivision is lot frontages that are 75 feet. Now, why am I saying this? Well, let's back up and ask ourselves the question, looking at the ordinance, which says that residential lots within existing residential subdivisions may not be subdivided with lot frontages less than average front footage of the abutting lots. Now, what's the reason for that? And I'm going to suggest to you that the reason for that ordinance that was adopted after 1997 was to prevent the chopping up of previously subdivided lots into smaller lots, which among other things might even accommodate mobile homes. That's not being suggested here. But the intent of this statute that we're applying here is to prevent the chopping up of residential subdivision lots into smaller lots than were a part of the original scheme. So I want to invite us to take a look at the scheme of the subdivision of Avondale. So let's go to Exhibit C then. Well, let's see B. Well, go to B. Go back to B. B is just describing down at the bottom right of your screen. Lee, if you can put your cursor down there on highway, there you go. That's the beginning of Avondale, which then that's on the Savannah Highway. And then Avondale is a triangular piece that goes out toward the Ashley River and crosses over St. Andrews Boulevard. There's your triangle formed there, and then you go up the other way. There you go. And the area that we're dealing with is, of course, on the I guess that would be the east side, the northeast side at least, of St. Andrews Boulevard. adjacent to the marshes of the Ashley River. So then we take a look at why don't we go rather than to B, Lee, let's go to well, maybe we'll go to B. I better take, C. Maybe I better take them in order. So let's go to C. Now, Exhibit C, this is a 1954 plat of the area that is an issue. The 692 Arcadian Way on this plat consists of lots 43. Can you see that on your, can you mark that one, Lee, on your? 43 is the second one up, the next one up. There you go. That's 43. Okay, so 692 consists of 43, 44, the next one up. And actually it was at one time a part of 45. You see 45 is that landlocked lot. See up in the top corner? Now take a look at that. When this subdivision was first created, you couldn't even get lot 45. It was landlocked. That was well before subdivision regulations. But you'll note that lots 42 was only 68 feet on the front. Lot 43 was only 71 feet. Lot 44 was 62 feet on Arcadian Way. Lot 45 was 0 feet. The Cecil Pearlstein lot was 75 feet. And the Britton lot to the north of it was 75 feet. So we're looking now at an original part of the subdivision scheme, and this really wasn't, we'll later see another earlier plat than this one. But the point I'm making is that we can see the scheme here as of the date of this plat, which was 1954, is showing lots that are 68, 71, 62, 75, and 75 feet in terms of the scheme of the lots. Now let's go to the next plat. Now the next plat is where they cured that landlocked plat in the corner. This is Exhibit D. This Exhibit D is a 1981 plat, fairly recently. And what they did is on Exhibit D is, if you'll put your cursor on that corner lot now, Lee, there you go, up on that corner, they created an 11-foot frontage right there on Arcadian Way to get into what was formerly the landlocked lot. So what they did is they shaved off a part of old lot 44, and they added old lot 44 to lot 45, created an 11-foot frontage on Arcadian Way so that you could get to it. So in a manner of speaking, that lot frontage is only 11 feet when you get to it. So let's take a look at the next plat, which is Exhibit E. Now, on Exhibit E is showing the lots that are across the street from 692. That top right lot, which is lot 15 of Arcadian Way, there you go. Now that's the one that has, and that's actually 75 feet, Lee, on the original plat. Now, that lot owner convinced Lee, and Lee, I don't mean this critically, that lot owner convinced Lee that the front of this lot is not that 75-foot frontage you see, but rather it's the 150-foot frontage, because when he built his house, it faces the 150-foot frontage. So that suggests, well, can you pick and choose what's your frontage? If your frontage is 150 feet, your side lot lines are only 75 feet. That is absolutely an upside down proposition. I don't intend criticism of Lee when I say this. Look at the lot right below 15, which is lot 20 on St. Andrews Boulevard. Do you mean to tell me that that guy on St. Andrews Boulevard is using that 150-foot frontage on Arcadian Way at his street address? No, he's using St. Andrews Boulevard as his street address because the 75-foot frontage is obviously the frontage. Now, so take a look at that block though. You see predominantly 75-foot frontages along the way. Remember now, what we're proposing to create in the subdivision before you is an average frontage of 77 feet. And I'm suggesting to you that the predominant front footage in Avondale was 75 feet. So let's go to the next exhibit. This is showing more of Arcadian Way. This plat, I think, is dated, this is dated 1943. And you'll see in 1943, that lot 10, which is up at the top right corner. Yeah, on the earlier lot I showed you, that was simply described as Mr. Pearlstein's lot. Well, that was actually lot 10. And you'll see that lot 10 is 75 feet. The lot to the north of it was 75 feet. Lot 8 to the north of it was 75 feet. Lot 7 to the north of it was 75 feet. Now the next lot shows 177 feet on Arcadian Way, but guess what? The frontage of that lot is not on Arcadian Way. It's on Oakdale. Now it is 85 feet, but it's not an Arcadian Way frontage. We go to the next plot, and I'm not going to beat this up too greatly, but the next plot is another section of Avondale, I'll suggest to you, showing predominantly 75-foot frontages. Go to the next plot, which is H. Again, predominantly. Now those are a bit large. Well, along Arcadian Way they're 100 feet and 85 feet, but along Oakdale, they're 75 feet. Let's go to the next plot, Exhibit I. Again, that's showing you another section of Avondale to the north of the one at issue. And what you see are lots that are even smaller, 50 feet frontages, 60 feet frontages, 70 feet frontages, and some 75-foot frontages as well. That plat was surveyed in 1947. Again, long before the subdivision we have at issue. So let's go to the next plat. Now, when Mr. Batchelder, maybe Lee, would it be convenient for you to go back to the plat that you used with the red numbers to show how you came up with the averages?
Yes, I can do that. I can just scroll back quickly.
And then we'll come back to the one I'm just showing you.
This one?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Lee's job here is very, very difficult because he's being asked to apply a post-1997 ordinance to a pre-1941 subdivision. And so at what point in time do you fix the subdivision? I suggest it ought to be certainly when it was originally subdivided, but that's not the point of my asking you to take a look at this. I guess it's maybe a tax map, or maybe it's 815, Lee. Can you put your cursor on the 815? There you go. Now, 815 Colony that you see right there, Colony was subdivided. A subdivision of Colony that I'm looking at of the section of Avondale was subdivided in I think 19 63, I believe it was. Very interestingly, 815 Colony Drive there, where Lee has his cursor, is 108, I think it's 118 feet. Lee is showing 106,
Right.
but the subdivision plat that I'm looking at shows 100 and, it might be 116.6 feet. Now, somewhat anecdotally, I believe that I'm correct when I say that that is the absolute widest front footage in the entirety of the subdivision of Avondale, in the whole triangular shooting match that I showed you earlier. And we may have figured out an historical reason why. Anecdotally, that 815 is the site of a former German prisoner of war camp where German prisoners of war were held captive during World War II. And there are remnants of some brick features of that World War II prisoner of war camp that still remain on that lot. And I believe that the reason the lot remained so large and the one adjoining to it was because of those historic reasons. Now, you'll see the property at issue there to the left of Lee's cursor, 692. You'll see that it's adjoining 692, 815 is, and therefore Lee counted it in his averages. Well, 815 Colony is literally miles and generations away from 692 for multiple reasons. 815 was not subdivided for many, many years later. 815, although it is adjacent to 692, is barely adjacent to it, and you cannot get there without going to a major thoroughfare, which is St. Andrews Boulevard. Now, the reason for this ordinance that we're asked to interpret is to avoid the chopping up of a subdivision into tiny parcels. Now, guess what? Take a look at what you're looking at in front of you. Lee, move your cursor over to 820, 22, and 26 Colony Drive there. Look what happened over there in Colony Drive. What you're looking at is why this ordinance was adopted and was probably done before it was adopted. You see right there on Colony Drive, those are townhomes. Colony Drive was in fact chopped up into tiny slivers of lots along the way. Whether that was done before or after 1997, I don't know, but it was done. And it was certainly done, if it was after 97, in contravention of the intent of this ordinance that we're asked to interpret here today. Now, with that caveat, Lee, can we go back to the Exhibit J that I was showing? That would be my Exhibit J, which was the Colony Drive plat. Yeah, yeah, that's it. Okay, so I was showing you, so this is the old Colony Drive plat. And so you see those chopped up pieces there as originally platted on Colony Drive. Remember those slivers there? Those were full-size lots. In fact, they're greater than 80 feet wide, and they were chopped up into slivers along the way. Does that excuse it? I don't know, but just for historical purposes. Then we go back to.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just so you know, those properties were subdivided long before 1997.
No, I don't question that. Yeah, no, I don't question that, Lee, at all. I don't question that. But we're looking. We're almost trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. we're having to apply a post-1997 ordinance to a subdivision that was created at least as early as 1941. And the intent of the statutory language, I suggest, is to permit what happened there on Colony Drive. Admittedly, that what happened on Colony Drive was after the 97, before the 97 ordinance. But the purpose of the ordinance was to permit the chopping up. It wasn't to prevent the enlarging of lots. It was to prevent the chopping up of lots. And so we go on to the next plats, and I'm not going to beat those up any more than just to flip through them to show you that they're showing, if you could go on, Lee, to the next, all right, and go on, just flip through all of those K. I think they're all labeled K. Go through all of them to the end. And what they're showing you, and stop right there. And so what I just flipped through quickly was to show you the scheme of the other parts of Avondale, which are manifestly 75-foot wide lots. All right, so now we get to the point of my argument here. The lots we propose to subdivide average 77 feet in width. And Lee, can you put your cursor on where they are? Okay, right. So what you're seeing is that Arcadian way. Now, not go below, go down to the lots. Go down one more. Go down to the 692, Lee.
Oh, right
Yeah,
here.
yeah. So right there is the property that we're seeking to subdivide. Now, across the street are these Arcadian Way lots. And so go flip over to those, Lee, with your cursor. All right, so those are 4 lots on Arcadian Way. Now, Lee measured the front footage of those lots by measuring the curved distance. The lots there on Reveille, that total distance on Reveille Court from the far left to the far right, that total distance from the far left to the far right is 315 feet. If you divide 315 feet by 4 lots, the average widths of those lots is 78.75 feet. Now, what Lee measures as the frontage, however, is longer. And why is that? And it's because Lee measures the curve. Rather than measuring the straight distance from lot line to lot line, he's measuring the curve. Well, that measurement would completely defeat what I suggest is the intent of this ordinance. And that is to prevent the slivering up, the chopping up of originally subdivided lots into the slivers that we saw over there on Colony Drive that were done pre-1997 ordinance, so that someone seeking to abuse the system could create curved lines and say, look, my lot averages are greater than 75 feet because you measure the curve. And so my suggestion to you as the board, I tried my best to persuade my dear friend Lee of this, but Lee has, I understand Lee had already been faced with similar interpretations with Reveille Court, so that he couldn't easily say, well, okay, well, I'm gonna change my mind for you capers, but just look at it. Reveille, by measuring Reveille Court along the curve, that's an aberration. By considering the POW camp lot, which is 116 feet wide and only barely adjoins the lot in question, and really doesn't even adjoin it because you can't get to it except going out by San Andreas Boulevard, really, it does not conform with the intent of the ordinance. It's really not an adjoining lot, not down the street. It's way the devil down a major thoroughfare to get there. So to summarize my position, I'm suggesting that the Colony Drive lot should be not considered because it's an aberration. It's the widest lot in the entirety of Avondale, and it really doesn't adjoin in the sense that the intent of this ordinance intended. And measuring Reveille Way along the curve really shouldn't be done that way. It should be done along the 78.75 average, which brings the math much closer to our 77 average feet. So thank you for your patience, folks. It's clear, I think, that the circumstances of 692 Arcadian Way are unique and are unique to this particular lot. It was originally 3 lots reduced down to something less than 3 lots, and then someone built on all of them. But it clearly now will permit 4 lots that are far wider than 75 feet on their frontage. And so I'm asking that the board reconsider Mr. Batchelder's interpretation, that they disregard as an aberration the Colony Drive lots, that they consider a straight line average on Arcadian Way, which then puts us right on the money to comply with the average of 75 feet front footage in Avondale. And thank you very much for your time and patience.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Is there anyone else present that wishes to speak on behalf of the appeal? Anyone registered to speak, Lee? Penny?
Penny?
The owner is here, Mr. Derwin Simpson.
Right. So are you saying that he is signed up to speak?
Yes, yes, he has, Mr. Batchelder.
Okay. So,
Mr. Simpson, would you like to speak on behalf of the appeal?
I really was just signing up to see it. So it's nothing that I could add other than what Ellis so eloquently presented.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone signed up to speak in opposition, Ms. Ashby?
No, Mr. Robinson, no one.
That being said, are there any questions, comments, or motions from the board?
I'm curious if we have a proposed plat of the new subdivision to look at
so I put that up on the screen.
earlier.
No, that's what is up on the screen right now. You should be looking at the proposed subdivision plat of 692 Arcadian Way that shows the 4 lots that Mr. Barr described with the average frontages of 77 feet, I believe it is what you said. But the minimum frontage is 75 feet down here and over here, and then these 2 are larger.
So
Mr. Batchelder, what is the required lot size in this district?
9,000 square feet.
Do these proposed lots meet that requirement?
Yes.
and where's the frontage measured on each of those?
Well, so 3 of the lots, it would be the only side of the property that abuts a street. Lot 1 which I have my cursor on, abuts Arcadian Way. Lot 2 actually abuts Arcadian Way and Reveley Court, so either side could be considered the frontage. A home could be built facing either street. And then you have the 2 lots that are proposed along Reveley Court. And the frontage would be the side of those lots that abuts Reveley Court.
So-
I don't know if you can still hear me, but lot 3, I'm looking at my magnifying glass, is 77.96 feet. And lot 4 is 75 feet.
So I would just like to say that it seems to me, I didn't completely understand what the ultimate decision was and why it was made in the prior subdivision, Lee, that you started to explain to us about how you, on that corner lot, whatever number it was, you used one frontage and then you were persuaded to switch to the other one. And it seems that that longer frontage has played a pretty big mathematical role in coming to the average. And, but it seems to me that where an owner of a lot aims the front of his house and elects to put in his driveway when he's on a corner where he could do it one of 2 ways, is almost an arbitrary thing. And when you're only taking an average of perhaps 5 adjoining lots or neighboring lots, if one neighbor happens to do that, it affects the math dramatically on what the average is for those 5 lots. And I'm just wondering if you could remind us, Lee, what was the reason that the board, I suppose, decided to use the longer measurement for the frontage in the prior case that you had, the prior subdivision. And well, I guess you told us that's where the driveway was.
Well, the house, if you just look at it on the street, it appears that the front side of the house could be the narrow side of the lot because of the way the house is designed. And there is a door that faces that street with a little walkway that comes out. But on the long frontage of that lot, there is also a door that faces that side of the property and faces Arcadian Way, the long frontage of Arcadian Way. And there's the driveway. And I recall having a discussion with the owners of that property back in 2014, after the first appeal was denied by the board, that no, their house was actually, the front of their house was actually the long side of Arcadian Way, because that was the front door for them on the property. So, and plus it also is where the driveway is located. And so you're just looking for a number of factors, and I went ahead and agreed with them and changed the frontage of that corner lot from the narrow frontage to the long frontage based on that conversation.
I've got a few comments. Mr. Barr, presentation was well delivered. I don't know if I can subscribe to the fact that we shouldn't pay attention to the ordinance as written because the subdivision predated it. Really would put this board in a heck of a bind dealing in the historic district of Charleston and other areas where we couldn't follow the ordinance as written. I understand the premise that you base that on, but I think we've got to follow the ordinance nonetheless. And if you really wanted to take that to the next level, you'd have to appeal the ordinance to the city council. That's my feeling on that. At the same time, I think your decision to recommend that Colony Drive lot be removed has got some credibility. I see your reasoning behind that, and it makes sense to me because if you look at subdivision lots, you've got to see how that Colony Drive lot would be impacted no matter how many lots you subdivided 692 Arcadian into. I'm not satisfied that I think that would reasonably be included, particularly since it's only got just a couple of feet of connectivity there. I think that I can understand where that could reasonably be thrown out of the equation. And more or less like Mr. Morrison was saying, the one directly across the street with the 150 on it, that was a choice made by the property owner. And apparently there is a possibility that the front of the house could actually be on Arcadian Way because it has a door leading out that side too. So I could see how those would skew the equation. Also, I think I agree with Mr. Barr's calculation of the frontages on Revelry Court. I know in the course of us doing work in appraisal, we take straight line distances to consider frontages and so forth. Particularly, you know, when we're looking at lots along the marsh and so forth, with so many twists and turns and the way marsh can undulate all around the lots, the highland contiguous. So we use straight line distances as well when we're considering frontages. So I can appreciate his argument on that as well.
I wanted to ask the property across the street, the 150 frontage, what is the address? Is the address on Arcadian Way or not?
Well, Arcadian Way,
Right. I mean, the
another unusual aspect is that
right.
the
I
street
apologize.
is both frontages. So
Right.
normally it'd be a different street name for the
Yeah.
perpendicular street, but no.
Lee, I have a question about the ordinance and perhaps in some way hypothetical. If, for example, you had a series of 75-foot lots, but two of them that were 150 feet, it sounds like it would not be possible for one of the larger lots to subdivide because the average would always be greater than 75.
You're correct. That would be true in that situation.
It seems like perhaps that's a fundamental flaw with the ordinance, and I realize the ordinance is not up for debate. I just wanted to point out one aspect of it that it makes it particularly challenging.
Well, I agree with John's point. Is interesting. Lee, do you feel that the decision that you made previously, or that you were changed to previously on lot number 701, is in about which side constitutes the frontage is binding precedent on us, or do we have latitude to make a decision that the frontage for purposes of this discussion should be the smaller of the two?
Well, I think you probably have the discretion to make that decision regarding 701 Arcadian Way. But if you make that decision and go with that frontage, that only drops the average frontage requirement or minimum lot frontage requirement for the subdivision down to 92 feet. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and so the other big factors, is that including, when you say that, are you including the 106 from Colony Drive as well in your computation?
Yes, I am including that again because it is adjoining or abutting the subject property at 692 Acadian.
Right. So just hypothetically, and not to ask you some lawyer's type question, but if the Colony Drive lot only abutted 1 foot on lot number 692, would it in your mind still be an abutting lot an adjacent lot that we have to consider under the ordinance?
Yes, I
Okay.
believe so.
That sounds like a trick question, Hal.
No,
Lawyer questions.
I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, I mean, Capers's point is appealing to me that lot is really in a different section of the subdivision and reachable only by going around a complete block, as it were. And in a way, it, you know, it's a bit of an aberration.
Well, the ordinance does say connected, and it does connect. I think, you know, I believe this board would be allowed the interpretation to say, yes, it connects, but it has no influence, and it really is outside of the definition of what connecting is intended to connote, if the board so feels that way.
Mr. Batchelder,
Yeah,
when did the owners of 701 determine that the frontage should be the longer side? When did they make that decision?
well, going back to March 2014, that was the initial appeal being heard by the Board of Zoning Appeals. And that was an appeal that was filed by the owner of what is now the Reveille Court lots. And that ownership, ownership interests were represented by an attorney who was part of the family. And so he appealed my decision. And when that appeal went before the board, the matter of the subdivision of that property became a public record, and the neighbors on Arcadian Way found out about that and began talking to me about what was being proposed and what the rules were, and out of the discussions that we had, I recall very clearly meeting with the owners of 701 Arcadian Way. That would have been after the March 2014 hearing. And I recall that they convinced me that the long side of their property was actually what they viewed as the front of the property rather than the narrow side. And so that's what caused me to change my decision. And then that became the frontage that I used when it was appealed again by the neighbors who hired an attorney to represent them. And my decision was appealed in 2015. So it was sometime in 2014 when I was having those discussions with the owners of 701 Arcadian Way, that corner lot, that I agreed to change the frontage that I would use for the calculations.
So I think I would agree or would be swayed that lot 815 on Colony Drive maybe should not be factored into the equation. The lot, if we go with the 150-foot frontage, let me restate that. If you think of this as a mathematical formula, the neighborhood is consistent with the smaller frontages. So to throw in the 150 foot would skew the average, or that's what's happening. So I would, I would think that, not that I would think, but I would be inclined to think that that differential is potentially too much of a skewing. If you just look at it, it just is so different from the rest of the neighborhood. If you go with the 150 being the frontage, that's what I'm struggling with.
I agree with that too. And I think that Mr. Barr made a really good case in regards to the 75 feet being in keeping from a historical context. So I'm struggling with that too. And I would also agree with removing the 106 feet from 815, although I do think we need to recognize that it is adjacent, but that it doesn't really have any bearing on this property.
Mr. Batchelder, you originally went with the shorter distance first in assessing this. Is that correct?
For the 701 Arcadian Way lot, that is correct. I did go with the shorter one.
And then you converted to the longer one.
Correct.
Frontage. Okay.
So then if it, and also I thought John's point was interesting, which I guess doesn't really apply in this situation, but so if we take out the lot 815, if 701, you use the 75 feet instead of the 150, you're still at 89.2, unless you then take the Reveille Court and make them straight measurements instead of using the curves. Is that right? Is that sort of where we are?
I think so. And I don't know if you were to use a straight line measurement, I can't tell you exactly what that would be. I know Mr. Barr has calculated that, but anyway, I think that's a good, accurate assessment of where we are.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just eyeballing lots 502, 04, 06, and 08. It looks like 502 straight line would be probably a 75 footer, but 504 may be wider. And even with a straight line measurement, 506 maybe 75.
Mr. Barr, it represented that the straight line distance from the north end of 502 to the south end of 508 was 310 feet, the total distance. You divide that by 4 lots, you came up with the number, I think it was 78 feet average. Is that right?
Yes, sir. And that was just, I was just applying a ruler to the plat.
So it's 3 things that factor into the decision. It's 815, the 150 frontage, and then the measuring of the frontage on Reveille using a curve or a straight line. Those are the
Do
3
you
variables.
typically use the curve as in your calculation?
Pardon?
Do you typically calculate on the curve?
So in applying these rules, you find all kinds of different situations. And there are a lot of curved streets, especially in older neighborhoods. And so, yes, we have always applied the curve. The frontage, the definition for lot frontage, again, is the length of the, well, I'm going to go back to it. The front side of the lot that abuts a street or thoroughfare from which direct vehicular access to the lots may be available. So the front side of the lot that abuts the street, in the case of, oops, went backwards. So the front side of the Reveille Court lots is the actual length of the line, following the straight lines and the curves. And again, if I go back to what the calculation was based on the January 2015 determination, the minimum frontage requirement for the subdivision of these lots along Reveille Court was 91 feet. So you see the 91-foot requirement met here, and then the other lots ended up being a little bit longer than that. So that's, as best I can recall, why that subdivision looks the way it looks.
The turnaround at the end of Reveille Court is a little interesting, just because it's located split between two lots as opposed to at the end. Is it plausible that the layout for the street was such that each of the four lots hit exactly at the 91, including the turnaround to account for that, to give it the length it needed?
Well, that turnaround was a requirement for the fire department and
Okay.
public service vehicles, and so it ended up working in the favor of the applicant to be able to use it that way.
Was it increased to give it that 91-foot length?
You know, I don't recall. Honestly, I don't recall.
Any other questions or comments? Any motions? It's a little bit of a twister, no question about it. And there are at least two ways to look at it, maybe three or four. But we were required to come up with an answer here tonight. So does anyone want to throw any more comments out or make a motion?
We'll move to grant the appeal.
Second.
Any comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Morrison,
Aye.
Mr. Judon,
Aye.
Ms. Grimes,
I'm gonna say nay, because I'm just not comfortable with a couple of aspects of it.
you say nay.
Yes.
Ms. Richards, Ms.
Aye.
Richards?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Ms. Vargas.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Bennett,
I vote aye.
Mr. Robinson, aye. A vote of 6-1, the motion carries. And the zoning administrator's decision has been reversed.
And can I just ask for a clarification? Does that mean that you're agreeing that this subdivision should be allowed, or?
I don't think I don't believe the agenda really called for that, did it, Lee?
No, I don't think so. So the question would be then, well, what does that end up meaning? So use this narrow frontage for 701 East Bay Street and the chord lengths for the Reveille Court lots, and don't count Colony Drive. Is that?
I believe that was the gist of what the board's decision was made on.
Okay. I'm not sure where that leaves us exactly with regard to the subdivision. That's
You know,
proposed.
it seemed that an application with the plat accompanying it needs to be made, but for us to sit on, because that's not on the agenda.
Right.
On
Well,
this
the
item.
next, I will say that
Item.
the next item on the agenda is a request for variance. And
Could I ask for some clarification? Forgive me for interrupting, about the exchange that was just made and therefore what it was that was approved?
Well, you know, I think you brought up the issue of the fact that the advertisement may have not been written exactly right. And we were conducting the case based upon the zoning administrator not approving the subdivision of 4 lots. So we took that as to be what the appeal was. You were approving, I mean, you were appealing his disapproval of the 4-lot subdivision. And so the board voted on that.
So the board has reversed Mr. Batchelder's interpretation, which means the subdivision is approved, correct?
Well, we don't, you know,
That wasn't the
the
intent.
subdivision presented in your exhibit was really not part of the agenda, not the approval of a subdivision, a specific subdivision was not part of the item before us, I don't believe.
That was exhibit L to the memorandum, was the actual subdivision.
Well, the intent of the motion that I made was with the guidance that the chair gave to Mr. Batchelder a few moments ago, which is, and there's apparently a consensus on, which is a remeasurement to get to a required lot size that excludes one lot that was included, changes the frontage measurement on another lot that was included, and measures the chord width of the other 4 lots.
Okay. And by chord width, what does that mean?
I think I know what Mr. Batchelder means, but I'll better let him explain it.
I'm going to go back to, where was that plat? Well, let me just use this.
If you go to exhibit L, Mr. Batchelder,
Okay,
exhibit L is a detailed plat of Reveille Court. There it is. That's a detailed plat of Reveille Court.
so I believe the chord length would be from this point, this corner of the lot on Arcadian Way. This is for lot 1. This corner of the lot on Arcadian Way to this corner of the lot on Reveille Court. That straight line distance would be the chord length, my understanding. Is that correct?
Well, you may come out with different numbers than if you use Mr. Barr's suggestion that you take the total distance of the frontage of all 4 and divide them by 4. I'd like to see it both ways, honestly.
If you look at that plat, at the bottom measurements of lot 1 there, Lee, in the left lower corner, but lot 1 of Reveille Court,
Yeah.
right? if you, those are measurements. You take that measurement from that corner to the, no, not to the corner of the lot. If you measure the whole width of the property, those measurements, my point is those measurements are surveyed and shown to show you the width of the property from left to right. If you look at the very bottom measurements on the plat,
Oh, these?
there you go. There you go. And then from there you go. And I believe that that total distance is 307.06 feet. Now, somebody check my measurement. If you divide that by 4, that comes to 76.76 feet. Is that would be, that's what I was trying to articulate at least earlier.
Well, he may need to take, this is just ad lib guidance, but that thing we read at the beginning of this about how cul-de-sacs are handled may come into play.
You know, this is an interesting case. I've been on the board 30-some years, and I don't think I've had one like this before, because the question asked is, by reversing the zoning administrator's decision, are we accepting the plat? Well, we really didn't slice and dice the plat that much. We were just looking at the concept. And I didn't see that plat really, it's not on the agenda in this item to be accepted. So I you know, I'm at a loss to how to handle this properly. Other than the fact,
Well,
we've agreed that to relook at it and look at the calculations based on the way, on the recalculating based on those 3 adjustments.
Well, I can certainly come back at the next meeting with that information for the board to consider.
Mr. Barr, you understand where I'm coming from on this. If he does that and we come back to the board again, then the plat would be the center of attention.
Sure.
And then we can deal with it very directly. Is that satisfactory?
I believe so. My client's not here next to me, so I can't consult with him about that. But I think I follow what you said. Yes, sir. And thank you very much for your indulgence in permitting this this last dialogue to clarify this.
Mr. Batchel, does that sound reasonable?
Right, that does, and that would mean that we would that I would present to you at the next board meeting what the average frontage would be using the narrow frontage of 701 East Bay Street, or 701 Arcadian Way, the different dimensions for these Reveille Court lots, and not including Colony Drive. Is that?
I believe that was what the board's request or suggestion was.
Yep.
And the case would be heard de novo based upon the survey that Mr. Barr had this evening as an exhibit. So, Mr. Barr, does that decision work for you?
Yes, sir. I think I understand it, and I'll circle up with Mr. Bouchelder and move the ball.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Batchelder, based on that, is it necessary to go to the next item on the agenda?
Well, I guess I'll leave that up to board, I would say no, that would be continued to the next meeting as well.
That's the way I would see it as well. Mr. Leeseman looks like he's the attorney for the applicant. Does, Mr. Leeseman, are you present?
I am, Mr. Robinson.
You heard all this going on. Is that satisfactory to hear it before the next meeting?
If I could ask one question, and obviously we want to follow the board's lead, but I think as Member Bennett indicated, when we're dealing with the math, unless we're dealing with all 75, 76, and 77-foot lots, we actually don't get to the point to where our lot sizes of 75, 76, 77 feet could be approved under this formula. And so, Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, and again, I couldn't give this presentation as well as Capers did if I practiced about it. If it is possible for us to proceed with the variance request, and it'll be brief, then it might obviate the need for Lee to come back to the board. And again, if we have the variance, then we would be allowed to proceed on this idea of these 75, 76, 77-foot lots.
Yeah, the only issue, I'd like Mr. Batchelder to spend some quality time with and do the calculations very accurately and to make sure he feels comfortable with it. You know, if you're asking, if you met his calculations, you wouldn't need a variance. So, you know, if it works out, the numbers fall in place, you wouldn't even need to come back before the board. The variance would be requested if you don't quite make those numbers.
Okay.
So
Well,
I would suggest that maybe we defer this and let him do his calculations in the solitude of his office and then reconsider the whole case.
understood. And I think if we were bringing this back before you, Mr. Chairman, and seeking the least variance possible in terms of that revised average, that would include, I think, a number of lots on Arcadian as well that are 75 feet, then we would come back before you when you've got that updated information and allow for you to make that more fully informed decision.
Well, I'd suggest maybe you have a little conversation with Mr. Batchelder between now and then, and so you all have an idea of how each other is thinking about it.
Understood. Thank you, sir. Will do.
Very good. So I'm going to exercise my authority as our former chairman did from time to time and defer this application to the next meeting of the board. Thank you all very much. Sorry to make you wait so long, Mr. Leeseman. Very good presentation, Mr. Barr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Nice seeing you all.
Next item on the agenda is 321 Bayley Road, Daniel Island. Request variance after the fact from section 54-823 Daniel Island Master Plan zoning regulations to allow an HVAC platform with a 15-foot 9-inch setback from the rear property line, 20 feet required, zone DIR. Mr. Batchelder.
Okay, let me get my bearings. Okay, now we're dealing with a residential property on Daniel Island, 321 Bayley Road. And the map shows the location of the property. And what I'll point out on this map is that this large irregular shaped piece that is behind 321 Bayley Road is a pond and HOA open space area. It is not a residential lot. The application, information, an aerial view showing the location of the property highlighted here in blue. And then behind that, you see this pond and a path that goes through that open space area that is HOA property. Zoning map and the survey showing the property. So I'm going to skip right to the, this is what was used for the approval, and this was a foundation plat, but I'm going to skip right to the site plan that shows and survey that shows the issue at hand. And what we're dealing with is this AC stand right here. So the house itself meets the 20-foot setback, as you can see. The steps off the back of the house into the backyard, the steps encroach into the rear setback, but that's permitted by the zoning regulations for Daniel Island. Steps can encroach into rear and front setbacks. But the AC stand, the air conditioning stand, because it is a platform that's raised up off the ground in order to meet the flood FEMA requirements, the platform itself becomes a building, and it's part of this building, and therefore it's not supposed to encroach into a building setback. The plans that we approved for the construction of the home did not show the AC stand located on the back side of the property, on the back side of this house. The AC stands were shown over on this side, and they were permitted. And there are some AC stands over on this side of the property, and the setback that's shown here is not our city zoning required setback. That may be a setback that's based on the Daniel Island Architectural Review Board requirements, but our setbacks allowed for these stands on the side of the house over here. But this was placed back here after our approval and during construction of the home. So the issue is a variance to allow that stand to encroach into the rear setback on this property. And there is no opposition. Is that correct, Penny? We've not heard from anybody in opposition.
You're correct, Mr. Batchelder, no opposition.
Thank you. And the fact that this property does back up to an open space pond area, not another residential property, I think means that granting this variance will not adversely affect anyone. And the lack of opposition also, I think, points to that. In addition, if this stand was to be relocated, and we have information in our file from the, from the applicant about how that would create a problem with the length of the line that is supposed to connect to the interior unit carrying the coolant. But if that was relocated to the side, it would probably create a more adverse situation for an adjoining property owner than where it is now, which does not really affect any adjoining property owner. So our recommendation in this case is for approval of this after the fact variance to allow this stand to remain. And I'll just show you some photographs. So this is a view of the stand on the back of the house. You can see it's enclosed and attractive. You see the steps next to it. Another view, side view. View. So that concludes my presentation. Again, no opposition. We recommend approval.
The city recommends approval. There is no opposition. Mr. Judon moves for approval, seconded by Ms. Grass. All in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Morrison?
Aye.
Mr. Judon?
Aye.
Ms. Grass?
Aye.
Ms. Richards?
Aye.
Ms. Vargas?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett,
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye. The motion is unanimously passes and as does the application. Thank you very much. Last item on the agenda is 109 Cumming Street, Canterbury, Elliott Borough. Request special exception under section 54-110 to allow the expansion of a non-conforming building footprint by allowing a one-story addition to an existing hair salon that extends the non-conforming 0-foot north side setback 3 feet required. Mr. Batchel.
190 Cumming Street is actually a residentially zoned property, but it has a commercial use on it, which was permitted through a use variance. So we don't view it as a non-conforming use in that respect. We view it as a conforming use because it has had a use variance granted by the board many years ago. So the expansion of the commercial use, the hair salon, is not an issue, except that the building addition will extend a non-conforming 0-foot north side setback. The property is in Cannonboro, Elliott Borough, just north of Morris Street. I'm gonna skip right to it. So here's an aerial view. This is the old Immaculate Conception School, which is now a senior housing facility, and the additions that were built for that facility are shown right here. You can see the subject property just to the south, and it's quite large, very deep. And when I go to the zoning map, you'll see this is approximately, it's not an accurate location, but that's approximately the size of the building on the property that exists there today. So it's quite small. It's one story, quite small compared to the size of the property. These are views of the existing building. You see the one-story building here. At the front of the property, any driveway off Cumming Street that provides access for vehicles into the property. Another view of the existing building. View of the back of the building. And side view. This is the interior. This is an existing hair salon, obviously been impacted by the COVID virus, the business that has been operating here for many years. And so they would like to expand. Here's the survey, again, showing that very small one-story building and on what is, for that area, quite a large property. And this view shows the proposed expansion of the building. Again, it's a one-story addition. So expanding that use will extend this non-conforming north side setback. Will extend that non-conforming setback. And so the issue is whether that extension will adversely affect neighboring properties and the light and air impacts and that sort of thing. But I'm happy to report in this case that the adjoining property owners, the senior housing to the north, which is Radcliffe Manor, known as Radcliffe Manor at 200 Cumming Street, has provided a letter to us that there are no objections to the renovation of 190 Cumming Street, Hair Best Salon. That was dated January 4th, 2020. And the owner of the property to the south at 188 Cumming Street has provided a letter as well that he has no objections to the addition being added to the neighboring property at 190 Cumming Street. And this is a letter from Walter H. Smalls III. And then we have a letter from the Cannonboro-Elliott Borough Neighborhood Association President, Marion Hawkins, indicating that the Neighborhood Association supports the applicant's request to expand their business in this way. And so there has been no opposition voiced to this request. Is that correct, Penny?
That is correct.
And as you can see, there's plenty of room for parking. Doesn't require very much parking at all for this small business. But that's not an issue. It's only the extension of that non-conforming side setback on the north side. So we recommend approval of this request, and certainly recognize the hardships that the business owner has undergone during these virus times. So
The city recommends approval and there's no opposition. So moved, approval moved by Ms. Richards, second by Ms. Vargas. All in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Morrison,
Aye.
Mr. Judon,
Aye.
Mr. Grass,
Aye.
Ms. Richards,
Aye.
Ms. Vargas,
Aye.
Mr. Bennett,
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye. Motion is unanimously approved, as is the application. Thank you very much. That's it.
So Penny, I missed the view from the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. Think you ought to go back to it.
I might. I had to come down to earth at some point.
Okay. That was